filling up the tank. It's something that's replenishing rather than taking away. So it's finding stuff that allows us to give us more energy, to as I say, literally fill that tank up. And it's not really about stuff that we're having to do and forcing ourselves to do or not enjoy doing. This is finding stuff that we want to do, like to do. And for many, we're not doing enough of that, or we don't feel we've got the time to or the energy to do it. And yet it's so important. As I've talked about before, and as I'll show you in a second, many will say that self-care is the key to a balanced life, i.e. you've got to look after yourself somewhere down the line. Yes, you may have to work. Yes, you may have to run a family. But yes, you've also got to look after yourself. And debatably, you've got to start there. You've got to look after number one first before you can look after others, and then put the kind of level of work and effort and energy in the stuff that you're going to have to do. So how balanced is you? I'm always talking about that balance between work, domestic and social. And finding that balance, I think, is critical. And so many are just so heavily work balanced, if you like, or work weighted. And that can't be a good thing in the long term. Even if you love your work, even if you're passionate about your work, there still has to be that kind of balance. But if we're going to talk balance, here's a kind of callback. So again, here's a quick reminder of a couple of things we talked about in well-being and others. So this kind of concept of eudaimonia, and as we'll see, I'll show the flourishing side in a minute. So eudaimonia, the good life, the happy life, the balanced life, coming from the Stoic philosophy, your inner happy demon, eudaimonia. And so this kind of concept of eudaimonia, or a balanced life, or flourishing, or looking after ourselves, is that kind of three dimensions of number one, taking responsibility for ourselves. You're the one that decides to work late and hard. You're the one that decides to do this, that, or the other. So you've got to take responsibility, and that is absolutely a fundamental of self-care, isn't it? Is taking responsibility for yourself, and for looking after yourself. And then part of that then is focusing on bits that you can take responsibility for, that you can do something about, that you can control. So it's that understanding that there are some things that we can't control, and outside of it, and some things we can. But the most important thing is we can control is our thought processes. And I think that's very much key. And then finally, that concept of living with arete, which is that virtuous self, if you like, your best self, is putting your best foot forward. And how frequently, how often are you living with arete? There's our self that we are on a day-to-day basis, and the self that we'd like to be or could be on a day-to-day basis, and how big's that gap? And living with arete is that ability to really close that gap and be our best self on a day-to-day basis. And to do that, we need to self-care. We need to kind of look after ourselves, and be conscious of self. So these three concepts, I think, are really important as responsibility, focus, and kind of best foot forward, best self. Doing the best we can on a day-to-day basis is absolutely fundamental to eudaimonia, to self-care. And from that positive psychology world, then, as that broad concept, then there's this concept of PERMA that again I've talked about before, and is very much kind of out there at the moment, given the environment that we're in, and what's been going on. So this kind of idea of these 5 things to kind of find what originally was called kind of happiness, is how do we find happiness, but actually is these days termed as flourishing. And what is it that we can do to look after ourselves? And as we'll see and break these down in a little bit, is have positive emotion, positive thinking, and positive mental attitude. 2, and I still haven't changed this slide, so apologies for that one. Engagement, i.e. engagement. So once again, apologies for the spelling on that one. I will change that. Helen, please make a note, and I'll change that slide somewhere down the line, because I keep forgetting. So engagement, focus, something to draw our attention, something that really we enjoy doing or are passionate about, and really takes our focus. Positive relationships shouldn't need any explanation, and we'll come back to that a little bit. Meaning, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? Where are we going with what we are doing? What's the point in what we are doing? And then finally, accomplishment. What are we getting out of it? What's the outcome? What's the result? What are we going to gain by it? So flourishing talks about these kind of 5 areas. And I think, again, from a self-care point of view, we've just got to look at these 5 areas and look at to what degree we're getting something from any of these. How positive are you on a day-to-day basis? How positive do you feel? How much time are you spending engaged in stuff, kind of doing stuff that you want to be doing that really gives you kind of focus and passion? What are your relationships right now? Why are you doing what you're doing? Are you clear on that? And then finally, what are you getting from it? Are you getting some sense of achievement, accomplishment? So there's a really good kind of yardstick and measure, and really worth looking more at positive psychology and particularly flourishing if you're looking to develop sort of things like self-care and well-being. So in terms of then self-care, really it's kind of breaking it down into these 3 areas. So it's pretty straightforward. Any activity that we do deliberately in order to take care of our mental, emotional and physical health. So this is a kind of conscious effort, and again, just keep that kind of, this is about filling the tank, not taking from the tank. This is not about draining it. So what are the things that drain your tank, and then what are the things that fill your tank? And as you can see, there's one of the kind of tools that you can do is a really simple kind of self-care pie chart, which is just listing all the things, and this is from the kids. Is all the things that they do that they just enjoy, and kind of makes them feel better and feel good. And you can do your own kind of pie chart around that. And on the one hand, just kind of list the things that replenish, that make you feel good, that give you energy, etc., and then put them in the pie chart to see how much time you spend doing them. But I think what's interesting is the first pie chart maybe is time at work, time domestically and time socially, and divide it up into 3 to see kind of how much time you're spending in each. And then with each one of those, within each sector, section, i.e. your work section, are there things that replenish at work? And the same with your domestic, and the same with your social. So within each of the kind of those 3 areas, then look at the activities that replenish, and hopefully you'll find a fair few things in each one of those 3, professionally, domestically and socially, that replenish. And it's not just your social area that replenishes. And I say that, by the way, and I also find that some people, socially actually have much more going on that drains the tank than fills the tank. That social relationships that they've got are draining rather than replenishing. So just be careful on that. So there's a really good study in just kind of listing stuff that fills the tank up, and really considering what gives me more juice, fuel, and what is it takes away, and in what aspect does it. And then you can think about whether that's kind of a mental thing, an emotional thing, and a physical thing. And what I want to do over the next sort of half an hour or so is just kind of break those 3 things down a little bit. They cross over, of course, but I'm just going to kind of break them down into those 3 sections, just to give us a bit of kind of focus and a bit of direction. So if we're going to talk self-care, I guess the bit we kind of need to go into a little bit is around mental health. I'm only, again, just not going to touch in any great depth in this at all. We're going to keep it at top level stuff. And so I think when we start talking about the kind of mental side of things and mental health, then we do kind of look in the area of kind of stress and pressure. So, at the moment, then, as I say, a lot of people feeling very stressed, feeling very pressured in terms of what they're having to do to adjust and adapt and cope and live, etc. And that takes a huge amount from people in terms of draining the tank. And I guess the observation really, though, on sort of pressure and stress is kind of looking at where you're at in general, but where we also kind of need or want to be. Because I think many people, if you look at the tip there, you look at it and it's just inside that strain area, just beyond stretch. So I think in an ideal world, what we're looking for is to be able to kind of put ourselves just over the stretch mark into the strain mark. If we're talking about things like high performance, then what we're looking at is being able to kind of push the boundaries a little bit, whether that's kind of physical exercise or just mental activity, is doing stuff that really challenges us, that puts a bit of pressure on us. And that's a really good thing. That's where we develop, that's where we learn, that's where we progress. And I think in terms of kind of self-care, then one of the really important things that we need to be doing is not allowing ourselves to kind of sit in this boredom and comfort zone. That's not self-care. Self-care really happens when we begin to stretch. And so the ideal green zone is that stretch zone. But the real productivity comes from that just tipping over into that strain zone, where you're stretched just to that point. What's really important though, if you're kind of working on that cusp of stretch and strain, is that you can only do it for a period of time. And then you've got to rest, then you've got to break, then you've got to take time out. And it's got to be a kind of 50-50 deal here. So if you're stretching and straining for a minute, then you relax for a minute. If you're stretching and straining for a day, you relax for a day. So this is where we tend to get it wrong. I've said this several times before to people, is you've got to have that balance. So if you've been stretched and strained for 3 months, then fundamentally you need to then find a way to relax for a significant period of time. Now, of course, on a day-to-day basis, we may do that during sleep, and we'll come on to that in a little bit. So there's a balance on a 24-hour day often, where, if you get 12 hours of hard effort and work, etc., then, if you get 12 hours relaxation, be that sleep or just kind of sitting down and unwinding, then that's not a bad balance. But again, most of us don't. Most of us have stressed at work, probably working, long hours. Then we have stress at home because we've got families and that kind of environment. And then we even get stressed in the social environment, and then we don't sleep very well. So that's where it doesn't add up. If you're not getting that balance and that 50-50 balance, then it's just about pushing it back. So self-care then says, okay, I can't operate at this strain level. I need to operate in the stretch level. I need to kind of go to the lower end of the stretch level, which is kind of push myself, but not to any great degree, is to find that kind of zone where, yeah, I'm kind of learning stuff and I'm doing stuff and I'm kind of pushing myself a little bit, but not to any great degree. It's very manageable. But anything below that stretch in that comfort zone, then we risk stagnation, and that's not self-care. So don't mistake the comfort zone for a self-care zone for any period of time. You can only really sit in that comfort zone if you spend reasonable time in that stretch and strain zone. So I hope that makes kind of sense, and it's just that balance. Stress and rest is what we're talking about here. So self-care is that balance between pressure and stress, and then taking the break from that. And if you think about that on a 24-hour cycle, that's probably the easiest and best way to do it in terms of quality of sleep, quality of kind of, as I say, rest and kind of relaxation, as opposed to kind of what we call grind and work. Okay. But if it's not working, then just a sort of 4 things that I would be wary of. So this is when we tip into the kind of idea of kind of mental health. So this is really my one nod to those that may be struggling a little bit. As I say, I don't want to, I'm not a clinical psychologist, although I do spend a lot of time in the kind of that mental toughness and thus mental health kind of area. But these 4 things I think are probably worth thinking about if you are on that kind of cusp of struggling a little bit, or just maybe in risk of doing so in the future. So I think this is good for anybody. So I think it's about identifying early warning signs. So we'll be talking about warning signs of what stresses you or what makes you anxious. What is it that all of a sudden starts to debilitate? And this might be people, the mood suckers and the energy suckers. It might be situations, circumstances, events. There can be various things. What are they? And then know your early warning signs as to when they're starting to happen to you, when all of a sudden there are triggers in place. And again, social, domestic, and professional, I think, organizational, I think are really important in terms of the warning signs that kind of all of a sudden tip you towards those edges of stress, pressure, anxiety, or whatever it is that it may be that is unhealthy mentally. And as part of that, then may be things like mood diaries are useful. So go back to this kind of idea of filling the tank or the tank being emptied. Mood diaries can really help us. And this ties into the emotional well-being, of course. But this kind of mood diary is kind of what fills your tank, what empties your tank, what puts you in a good mood, what puts you in a bad mood. And when I say good and bad, that just might be a relaxed or happy as opposed to a stressed or anxious mood. So just kind of logging that down, you know, and you can do them online. You can get apps, you can put it on a piece of paper, you can even talk to a kind of camera and video and talk. One of the things that I use, and this is to do with my triathlon training, as many of you know, I do a lot of sort of long distance triathlon training. Is as soon as I've finished any kind of activity, I have an app where I talk to the app. I record on the app how I feel and how I felt kind of going into that training session, how I felt during, and particularly how I feel afterwards. And that then kind of puts some magical formulas together and really kind of helps me track what's going on mentally with my training and where I'm at with it. This is not something we need to do in any kind of great scientific level, although it's pretty useful. But actually just keeping a kind of track of moods and kind of what affects them is a really useful thing to do. So if you're kind of not sure and you kind of find yourself just kind of being pretty reactive with kind of what going up and down a bit, then maybe a mood diary might help. We probably all know this one is just kind of telling people kind of what helps. So talking to people and letting people know kind of what helps and what they can do to help you, and whether that's kind of keep away from you, give you some space and peace and quiet, whether that's they can just get you out of the house, whatever they can do that may be able to support and be able to help. And this is on a professional level, is whether you're talking to kind of GPs or therapists, or mainly what we're talking about here is family and colleagues and friends, etc. Is what helps you kind of change that kind of mood for you, what would shake you out of it. And then finally, this kind of build bit in terms of building self-esteem, and I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. So I've got a slide on that one in a minute or two that will kind of dig into the self-esteem bit, because I think in terms of self-care, when we talk self-care, we need to start talking things like self-esteem and self-worth and self-confidence. So I'm going to come back to that in a second or two. So I think the other thing then, that in terms of kind of being aware of that mental health, that key bit around stress and pressure, is again a fairly obvious one, but it's that ability to relax. I think it's when and how do you relax? How can you take that pressure and stress off? How do we get that kind of break? So as I said, it's that 50-50 deal where we'll have stress and pressure, which is good, but we have to be able to relax. And some people just don't know how to do it. So here's just a little list of the obvious, but can you just kind of do this mental checklist of which of these do I do and how much of them do I do? Or you make your own list of things that you do to actively relax, to make yourself relax, that you enjoy, that replenish your tank. So when I say take a break, what I mean by these kind of things, this is a kind of catch-all, these are kind of just broad titles. I'm talking about reading a book, I'm talking about having a bath, I'm talking about cooking if you enjoy cooking, going for a jog if that's what you kind of do. So this is just doing stuff for yourself that is a break away from what is stressing and pressuring. So these can be any kind of hobbies or activities, but particularly I'm talking about the passive ones. So, really it is just things like, sitting down and maybe just enjoying a glass of wine, watching your favorite TV program. I've got no problem with any of those in short periods. So generally we're talking passive, although active is fine. So anything that is a break away that is going to, as I say, replenish those tanks, and we'll come back to those. Breathing techniques. I think, really important breathing techniques. In fact, what I might do is just, I might have something for you in a minute or two that we get time, I might go and use. But, I often put this in physical well-being is just breathing. I wonder how many of you actually do take time to focus on your breathing. It's one of the things you do all the time, but how well you're doing it and how conscious you are. So one of the best ways to relax is just focus on your breath. And there's lots of different kind of deep breathing techniques. I use often what they call the square breathing technique, and I use it quite a lot for own relaxation. And square breathing is essentially where you're breathing in for a count of 4, for example, and then you hold your breath for 4, and then you exhale for 4, and then you hold for 4, and then you go through that cycle. So rather than doing the inhale for 4 and exhale for 4, or whatever it might be, you can square it off. So one of the ways to do that, by the way, is just to kind of build 2, 3, and 4. So you start with 2, which is inhale, let's say for 4, and you can build on this 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then exhale. Then you can do triangular breathing, which is breathe in for 4, breathe out for 4, then hold for 4. You can do the inverted, breathe in, hold, breathe out, breathe in, and then you get to the square breath. So there's lots of ways, but the most important thing, apart from actually helping you to breathe, and we're talking belly breathing here, but I'm not going to get too technical on that, it's just awareness of breath. Is just taking time out to focus on the breath, to count your breath, and just the counting of the breath makes a big difference in relaxation. So physiologically and psychologically, becoming much more conscious of your breathing is probably one of the easiest and most natural and most effective ways of relaxing, and that's why in self-care it's just a crucial thing. Music. So here's a great one that most of you probably know already, or many of us know. So listening, mood music. So find the music that replenishes, and that can be kind of heavy, I don't know, what is it? Drum beat, dub, I don't know, disco for me, 80s, right through to classical, to, you name it. What is it that floats your boat? But obviously we're talking things like relaxation, then lower tempo, lower beat. Something that's more soothing, finding that kind can make a big difference. So I would suggest always, I'm always a bit wary about things like listening to music. I get relaxing in the car and doing stuff, but actually I'm a little bit wary about that at times. I'm talking about really kind of be able to kick back when you have nothing to do to keep your attention on. So just be able to sort of sit back on a sofa or in bed or in the garden or wherever it might be, and just better then take some time out to listen to music, and that's where it becomes really effective. Visualization. So again, most of us are kind of quite au fait now with kind of visualization techniques. Daydreaming, that's what we're talking about here. Picturing yourself in a relaxation or relaxing place, environment. So whether that's by the sea or in a wooded area or out in a meadow or whatever it might be, is where's your relaxing place? Where can you go to inside your head? And anyone who has ever come across NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, which was a very popular kind of what I call pseudoscience, late 80s, 90s, still around, but not quite so popular these days. NLP talks about using all the senses, and absolutely that applies. So it's not just about picturing yourself in that place, but the more you can use all the senses in terms of kind of, hearing the sounds of the sea, for example, or the birds kind of, chirping in the trees, be able to smell the smells of, maybe that's of food, or maybe that's of grass cut, or maybe that's of, the sea itself. The more senses you can bring to bear, then the more you can put yourself in that position, and then more the body then can kind of get to that relaxing place. And if your mind goes there, then the body starts to follow. So if the mind is in that place, then the body kind of almost gets tricked into believing it is actually there, and physiologically will respond. So visualization of relaxing places and relaxing things is, of course, really effective. So we talked a little bit about passive and taking the break, then the active relaxation. So kind of similar concept. So things like, going for a walk, walking your dog is great. Things like yoga, sitting here, Tai Chi in particular. So active relaxation, slow jogging is okay, but I'm, more talking about walking, yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi, stretching, that type of thing are the kind of activities that we're talking about. Creative. So, if you're arty, if you like to paint, if you like to model, use clay, whatever it might be, make things, do things that kind of get the creative juices going, get you in that flow zone of real kind of focus, and that can be hugely relaxing on many levels. So, you know, just invent, create. Spend time in nature. So what are the things that get you out and just kind of look at the trees growing and the birds chirping and the animals doing their thing? What is it? How do you get out and about and go and spend time in the natural environment? And if you can do that, and you're lucky enough to live in an environment or haven't traveled too far to be able to do that, then of course that is really helpful. I'm so lucky as I live 2 minutes from the beach. So every morning I can go and run or take the dog for a walk along the beach. And there's no better way to kind of spend time on the seashore in terms of relaxation. And guided relaxation. So guided relaxation, I've kind of, again, talked about before. So this is, in particular, things like Headspace are good examples of apps that you can get that are kind of mindfulness type apps that kind of guide you through breathing techniques, staying in the moment, and that's what kind of we're talking about here with mindfulness, the ability to be engaged and fully present in the moment. So just bring you into to kind of what's happening right now, rather than worrying about what's happened and what will happen. And that's why breathing is so important and a key part of mindfulness. So guided relaxation, meditation techniques, deep breathing techniques, you can find them on YouTube, and you can buy the apps or get free apps, are well worth doing, because they just kind of go, right, I've got 15 minutes here, whatever it might be, and just allow someone to take you kind of away somewhere. And so they are highly effective to kind of help relax. So all of these things are useful techniques. All of them you probably know. It's that kind of checklist to which ones are you doing, which ones are working, and are they working? You know, I know people who use guided apps, for example, and they don't work. They just don't replenish. They actually take away because people are kind of counting down the minutes and going, I'm kind of bored now, and I'm wasting my time, and I'm thinking about other things. So don't kid yourself that all of these things work for you, because many don't. It's finding the ones that replenish and don't waste your time. So in a nutshell, and I'm going to say that a couple of times, just kind of 3 things to think about in terms of mental self-care. We put them all 3 up here. So do the stuff that feels comfortable, that feels right. Don't force yourself into places that you don't want to go. If it doesn't feel right, it's probably not. So find that kind of, you know, that thing that feels comfortable for you, that relaxes you. Number 2, give it some time. So take time to find out what you enjoy doing and what relaxes you. So give it some time, give it some thought, go through different things. Don't feel you have to do any. And, you know, most of us know by now, but actually I talk to people all the time and they still don't know. So go and find some new things. Take time and take small steps. So bit by bit, you know, don't expect to be a yoga, you know, whatever, a yogi who can, you know, pull all kinds of poses in the first week or so, or a Tai Chi master or a deep breathing expert. Is take time on these things, one step, you know, pick little kind of wins. And I think, you know, on all kinds of levels in terms of learning, development, but enjoyment, then those small steps are important. I've always said a key thing of mine is 2 things. Do something, but when you do something, do it small. Just take a small step, 1 step at a time. Don't jump on all these things at the same time. Okay, emotional self-care. We have been here before a couple of times, and I make no bones for the excuses for the next slide, but it will come on in a minute, and I'll leave you to guess in the chat box what slide I'm going to show you when we're talking emotional self-care, or where I'm going to come from. So just this kind of hold a slide while you put in the chat box what you think the next slide is going to show. In terms of emotional self-care, and when we talk about emotions, then we kind of come from it from 3 angles, really. There's no right or wrong, and it depends kind of where you come from here, and there's no kind of definitive answer to this. We kind of have the subjective experience of emotion, which is kind of those generic words we use to describe an emotion. So things like angry. And that's great because it gives us an idea of what we're talking about and what we're experiencing and the emotion. But, you know, it's subjective insofar as, you know, interpretation of anger. One person's anger is another person's kind of mild irritation, as opposed to someone else being livid. So there are lots of different words we can use to describe the same kind of thing. So let's be careful about kind of pinning the same word on. So, you know, emotionally, it's pretty subjective when we use anger, angry and happy and sad, etc., etc. But useful nevertheless. Physiologically, then this is that kind of gut feeling we get, or those cold sweats. So this is where we get some kind of physiological response. And is it the physiological response that drives the feeling or the emotion, the thought, or is it vice versa? Let's not get into that one right now. But some of us kind of experience emotions physiologically more than anything else. And then probably the most common one is the kind of behavioural response. So, you know, when people cry because they feel sad, or they smile because they feel happy. So tied into the subjective experience then is the behavioural response that we get. But I think that behavioural response is really important, because it's the action we're interested in terms of self-care. It's that active doing something. So whatever the sort of subjective and physiological experience is, it's the behavioural response that we're really looking for in terms of developing self-care. And no one's put everything in, so I'm going to put the next slide up. And there it is, the chimp paradox. I think I've now managed to mention it in pretty much every single one of the talks that I do, and I wish I was getting commission from Dr. Steve Peters. But if we're going to talk emotional self-care, then we need to kind of talk the chimp paradox. And again, I'm not going to spend too much time. I'm going to tell you, read the book. Go and find out what we're talking about here in terms of managing our chimp, our limbic system, our emotional self. But self-care is about those all three. It's about the human, the chimp, and the computer. It's about balancing the human and the chimp, i.e. is allowing our emotions to get out there. It's important in self-care is to allow emotions to you know, get out, but they're getting out in the right environment. And they're positive emotions, and that's where the human element comes in. Is that, you know, we're in control of it. You know, we're enabling the chimp to operate under the right circumstances, rather than kind of worrying and being anxious because they're in the wrong circumstances. But really, it's that relationship between the human and the chimp that's putting data into the computer. And that computer is that kind of autopilot, and that's why it's so important in terms of kind of self-care, is because, you know, it's the ego, isn't it? Is what we put in is what we get out, and so I think it's really important that we're checking in on what we've got in our computer, in our mind, and emotionally, and what are we kind of then getting out of it. So in a nutshell, go read the book. But really, if we can find that balance between kind of emotional kind of well-being and mental well-being, the human and the chimp, and then put those together in the computer, then that will allow us to kind of operate at a consistent level of self-care, where it can start to become something that's kind of a habit that's quite natural rather than forced all the time. So what I'm trying to say is that self-care can be quite hard work when you're kind of actively having to think about what you're doing all the time. We need to get to a place where you don't have to think it through so much, where you're not kind of pushing yourself to kind of find stuff that replenishes, that you know what replenishes, and you start to replenish automatically, and your computer allows kind of replenishment to happen as a habit rather than something that you're having to make yourself do. And it's finding that kind of tipping point really, where you're switching from actively having to do it, where it's happening for you. You're active, but you're not consciously active, if that makes sense. So go and have a look. As you can see on that slide there are just the kind of three techniques that Steve Peters talks about in terms of controlling emotional well-being, which are important in self-care. So exercising, we'll come on to in a minute or two. Venting, which is essentially kind of allowing that chimp out, your emotional self out, to either talk to other people, to be able to kind of whinge and moan at other people, or just chat to other people, or just go and talk to yourself, or go and let your frustrations out in some way in a controlled environment. And then boxing your chimp really is your kind of last resort, that says you're about to lose control. What you need to do is you need to be able to kind of distract or just kind of ration and reason with your chimp. But boxing means that there is a degree of control you have over your chimp, and that's where the book comes in, is it teaches you to get a level of control over what can often be an uncontrollable emotional mind. And where we have uncontrollable emotional mind, we have a difficulty in self-care. The other thing I mentioned earlier on, and we need to talk about in terms of briefly in terms of emotional self-care, is this kind of concept of self-esteem. And when we talk self-esteem, I'm just going to stick it in this kind of whole box of all kinds of other things, from self-work to self-efficacy, self-confidence, self-assessment. You can see that the kind of list there. So this kind of self-esteem bit, I think, is quite well described in this kind of this tree, because ultimately, if we're talking about self-care, what often we do is we spend too much time thinking about the kind of the leaves and the fruit, and not enough time in the roots. So I think, ultimately, if we really want to spend time, and long term in self-care, or if we really need to kind of work on our self-care because we're struggling with that kind of mental health bit a bit, then we need to kind of emotionally go down to the roots of kind of self-worth, and where that comes from. And then to be able to kind of build through kind of emotional self-awareness and self-assessment. So things like emotional intelligence becoming so important, that allows us to kind of align self, and then we can start to build self-esteem, etc. So I think it's worth digging down into those roots, particularly if you kind of are struggling. This is where therapy comes in, of course, is start to kind of dig down. All we're talking about now is sometimes, self-care can be quite difficult because there's a lot of baggage, there's a lot of history, there's a lot of things that are stopping you self-care, and they will often, root down into things like self-esteem, or even deeper into self-worth. So I don't want to get too deep at this stage of the game. But if you are struggling to kind of hit these kind of higher levels and just kind of do practical things, if this is something that is happening kind of fairly frequently, or quite kind of to quite a degree and depth, then maybe it's worth going to see professionals, or at least taking time out to consider the lower ends of the tree, and spend some more time investigating that bottom level. Because self-esteem is kind of critical in the self-care bit. So that middle ground, and if we can find that level of self-esteem and have a good kind of solid trunk, then we can start building self-confidence, and as you see, sort of tolerance and resiliency and self-efficacy. That belief is that we can do stuff, that we can change stuff, that we can achieve. So the self-esteem tree, I think, is quite an important one. So based on that, then this slide could be titled Improving Emotional Self-Esteem. I've just titled it Emotional Self-Care. So just some sort of ideas, tips, techniques on that. And again, this is stuff, some we covered before, some are self-explanatory, but just forgive me if it kind of goes over stuff, but I think it's really important. So number one, and no particular order here, be kind to yourself. Again, goes without saying. I think that the slide that I've shown before, is around self-compassion. So finding ways to be kind to yourself is to praise yourself at times, to recognize what you're good at, and if we look at self-compassion or self-kindness, then I think often it's seen as three things. So self-kindness is about kind of recognizing our good qualities, same as you'd recognize someone, one of your friends, and what's good about them, that they're always smiling, they're always positive, or they're kind, etc. Then recognize that within yourself. Sometimes we're really good at recognizing it in others, but then we just don't see it in ourselves. So self-kindness is really important. Mindfulness. This is about then paying attention to our good qualities rather than taking them for granted. So apart from expressing kind of our appreciation for kind of what we think we're good at, you need to be mindful of what you're good at, is to kind of take that time out to kind of pay attention to it. What exactly is it that I'm good at, and what does it mean? What does it look like? Dig a little bit deeper. And then common humanity is really kind of acknowledging our qualities, our good qualities, but without kind of feeling bad about doing so. Often we kind of think, I can't think that I'm better or good at this because it makes me better than others, and that's not a good thing. It's not about that. It's just about recognizing where your strengths lie, recognize kind of what it is that you like doing and are good at doing. So I think, being kind to yourself it really, for some people, takes quite a lot of work. Find the stuff that you're good at. Find the stuff you're passionate about. Find the stuff that you are doing well that others would recognise. And if you can't find it yourself, get feedback. People you trust, people you know. If you're going to get feedback, then listen to it and take it on board. Other things that we can do is kind of noticing the good things. So tying into being kind to yourself is notice the good things that surround you. So kind of looking after yourself. Trying to notice the good things is often seen as a kind of 3-to-1 ratio in positive psychology. Is the science behind positive psychology says that there is a science in a 3-to-1 ratio. Is we need kind of 3 positive things to offset the 1 negative thing. To be happy, to be flourishing, there needs to be a kind of 3-to-1 ratio, and there's a scientific equation that balances that out, works that out. Scientific, you can probably find studies for anything, but I like the concept, and the concept is to be able to pick up on the good things rather than just the bad things. I have no problem picking up on bad things, but then recognize the good things too. What is going well? What do you like? What is working? All that kind of stuff. Notice those good things and put those in your computer and chew on those a little bit. Support networks, again, networking, support networks, friends, colleagues, we've done this to death, and I think most people know it. It's whether you're doing it, who is in your support network, do you have one, and to go and find it, go and extend it. But also in terms of kind of, I think this has to be a two-way process, doesn't it? Is as much as you kind of get support from others, it's the support that you're giving. So I think that's really important. But support network is a two-way process. Learn to being assertive is really important. Things like self-esteem and self-care. So that ability, that willingness to say no is to kind of to be able to assert how you feel and what you think without fear of getting some kind of comeback on it. So our ability to learn the skill of assertion, I think, is really important in all kinds of domains. So, I'm not just talking about saying no. It's the ability to kind of assert your rights, your thoughts, your feelings. So, assertiveness training has been around for an awful long time, and it's probably, often given a bit of a bad press. It's very generic sometimes, but it's so important. Setting yourself challenge. So this ties in what we talked about earlier on, the stressor and pressure bit, is that challenge should be kind of getting you into that stress, even strain zone. Is find a challenge, find something that you believe you can do, because that helps self-confidence and self-efficacy, but also will be a challenge. So, go find something, creative elements, physical elements. There's all kinds of challenges that may be there. Go and set yourself one. It's not necessarily about whether you achieve it or not. It's about the journey you go through. So I think, there are two ways we can look at this. One, some people say, well, I did it and I failed because I didn't do it as I thought I would or wanted to. And then they forget all the learning and all the good stuff that's gone along the way. So set yourself a challenge, but then go through the journey and recognize the journey. And if the challenge doesn't kind of come out as you kind of hoped, wanted, thought at the end, then what if you learn, and then are you going to reset a new challenge? Are you going to go for that same challenge again? Great, go on to the next step, and that's all good. Find support for connected issues. So, I think, that ties into this kind of, this support network. But this is around about kind of common themes, I think, that are coming up. So if we're talking mental health, then we're talking about sort of, connected issues around anxiety or around stress, etc. So this is about kind of where are these kind of connected issues, where are these kind of triggers that are very similar, and are you able to join the dots up, and if not, can someone help you join the dots up? And often it doesn't have to be professional. This is someone who's close to you, that you can trust, that can give you feedback, family, friends, etc., can help kind of join the dots that sometimes we can't see. And then finally, that looking after yourself, I think is what we're talking about here, really, is that physical side of things. And that's the last bit I want to kind of move into, very briefly, is the physical self-care side of things, the physical well-being. Ultimately, we have the mental, and tied into the mental, we have the emotional, but it's rare that these things are sustainable without the physical. And I know, again, most people know these things. And I think if nothing else, then just do a mental check on these three things in terms of your exercise. Are you doing enough exercise? And don't forget, exercise, physical activity can be just the kind of steps you take on a day-to-day basis. It's walking around the house and up and down the stairs and going to the shops and doing all the kind of general stuff that you do. So there's the kind of the general stuff. There is the exercise stuff, which is the kind of going out for a run or a bike ride, or a planned bit of exercise. There is the kind of fun stuff, the playing with the kids, the messing about stuff, the taking the dog out and playing with the dog. And then there's the one we're kind of missing, I guess, to a certain degree, which is the kind of competitive one, the team sports in general, the football, the rugby, the hockey, the netball, those types of sports. So I think it's that balance of exercise are really important, and whether that's your gym, whether that's your yoga, whatever that may be, is make sure that you're getting that kind of exercise that you need. Balanced diet goes without saying. It's the one that most people struggle with. I think, particularly over these past few months, many people have kind of put on weight. Diet has kind of started to go out the window a little bit. So balanced diet, that's all we're talking about here. I don't need to talk to you guys about diet. There's enough books, TV programs, and the like that are out there in terms of a reasonably balanced diet. When we're talking about diet, we're talking about kind of hydration and drinking in moderation, all that kind of stuff. And then finally, sleep. And again, 8 hours sleep is what we're supposed to be getting. Are you getting even close to that? What's that quality of sleep like? And what are you doing to make sure you get the sleep? That sleep there is your chance to recover. So I think, why do we sleep? On the one hand, there's lots of theories around why we sleep, but on the one hand, there's the recovery element, which is just allowing the body physically to recover from the stresses and strains of the day. I think that's really important. But I think the other one also is mentally. All the work that's going on these days around neuroplasticity is our ability of our brain to develop. And lots of kind of work being done at the moment in terms of how crucial sleep is to create time for the brain to regenerate. So it's not necessarily just a physiological thing, it's a psychological thing too. Sleep allows neuroplasticity to work. It allows the neural pathways to kind of consolidate and develop. There's something called myelin, a substance which kind of almost coats the neural pathways and strengthens them. It's produced when we put ourselves under pressure and stress, but it then has to kind of set, if you like, and sleep allows it to do that. So there's a lot of thought and thinking these days around not just the physiological but the psychological elements of sleep, which we've kind of known. It's just going into the depths and detail. Are you getting enough? Is essentially what's important. So we don't have the time, and I wouldn't want to kind of bore you with going into great depth. I've got a couple of slides, and if we can make these accessible, or there's stuff I can give you, so let me know if you're kind of lacking in stuff in terms of exercise tips and techniques and diet and sleep, etc. Otherwise, go YouTube, go Google. So those is, again, as always, is just a kind of a ramble through in a short period of time some sort of key concepts around kind of self care, both mental and emotional and physical. What I'd like to do is just kind of finish up with one last slide. I said I mentioned nutshell a couple of times. Let's just kind of refocus in on I think I've got probably 10 top tips here in terms of self-care. So in terms of encapsulating stuff that I've been rambling around, not just today, but for quite a long time now in lots of the talks we're doing, then here are they. In no particular order. Number one, talk about your feelings. So who is it you can talk about? Is let that chimp out, but in a controlled environment. So who can you talk to domestically, socially, and professionally? There should be people in each one of those domains that you can talk about your feelings, your thoughts, and particularly your feelings. Keep active, as just mentioned. So this is the exercise bit. So active relaxation, active exercise, which helps the body. Eat well, as again just mentioned. Drink sensibly. No one says you can't have alcohol, but it's that drink sensibly bit that I think is really important. But if we're going to talk drinking sensibly, that also means drinking enough water and hydrating well. Keeping in touch. So this is with, you know, and again, over the lockdown, then that really kind of came to the fore, didn't it? Is keeping in touch with people. All of a sudden we took for granted. So now it's about keeping in touch with people. So social media is key for that one. If we can't go and get them physically, but get out there and keep in touch with friends, families, and colleagues. Asking for help, and it doesn't matter how good a position you're in, we can always do with some help, whether that's help to do some DIY project, or whether that's help because you're feeling crap. Is who can you go to, and don't be frightened to, number one, talk about your feelings, but also to ask for help. As I mentioned, take a break, take time out, go take a break in some way, shape or form, active or passive, but take a break. And that doesn't mean just sleep. That also means an awake break, if you like. So relaxation. Do something good at. So is the self-confidence, self-efficacy bit, the mastery, the learning, all that bit is really important. Is go do stuff that you are good at. So hobbies and passions, if you like. I think accepting who you are without trying to go too deep at the very end is you are who you are. So grow to love yourself, warts and alls, without trying to seem too deep at this stage of the game. We're all perfect, just perfect in different ways. So accept who you are and get on with it. There'll be goods, there'll be bads, there'll be ups, there'll be downs. It's called life. And then finally, accept who you are. But also care for others. And I guess that's the final word, is that self-care is about looking after yourself, is about making sure that you're in a good place. But one of the best ways of doing that is also caring for others. So where possible, one of the best therapies for those people that are struggling with self-care is actually going to get them to help other people. And that's catharsis in that. So on this journey, somewhere down the line, keep an eye out for others and care for them as best you possibly can, because whatever position you're in, others are also struggling at times too. Okay, folks, an hour again. Look at that, almost spot on. There I am again, 45 minutes going on to my hour of as I say, general ramblings around this subject. Whole lot of stuff again we've covered. Lots of stuff to get you thinking. But go do something this time. Just make that commitment right here, right now, before you go anywhere, to go and have some exercise, go and bake a cake, go and take a rest, whatever you need to do to self-care. Put your diary in place, whatever you've got to do, go do it. Don't just switch off and do nothing. Otherwise, we are done for this series of webinars. Who knows whether we're back in September? We're certainly not around. I'm not around in August, but it'd be nice to come back in September. But I think if we're going to come back in September, what we'd like are some suggestions in what you would like me or others to talk about. What would you like a webinar on? What would be useful for you? So either in the chat box now, or contact Helen, or talk to others. Is if we're going to do these free webinars, and I'm quite happy to do them, quite like doing them. I love doing them, in fact. What's the subject? Let's not leave us to kind of guess at what you want to be talking about. Is you tell us what you'd like to hear, and hopefully we can put something together in September. So you can see Helen's put her email address up there, and that little chat box there. Otherwise, folks, have a good rest of day, have a good rest of week, have a good rest of August, and hopefully I'll catch up with you again sometime in September. Any of the issues that I've talked about in any of these workshops, always very happy to kind of touch base on them. Just get in contact with Lighthouse and they'll either get in contact with me or we can kind of work out a way of touching base. So please, certainly on some of these deeper issues, I'm very happy to help if I can. So keep me in mind in talking about things like support networks. If I can help, I will. Take care all, and speak to you again, I hope, very soon. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Adrienne. Thanks, Anna. Now there's me, you, and you.
Yeah, there is. It's because we had problems getting a skills test sorted out for, I think, Paragon, a professional discussion. So I've had to start it on my computer, and I can't work out how to get out of it because it's in Teams. So I had to put the sound on my iPhone and leave everything else on my computer.
That sounds
so yeah. Hence the stop of the recording at the beginning, but I kind of worked out the fear it's not like.
No, yeah, it's threw me again.
I know.
Right, I'm used to it. It's all right. So there we go. We're done.
Okay, fab. I will see you tomorrow for.
Yes. What time are we on tomorrow? Is it 12? Or was it? I don't know what time it is.
30, I think. I'll double check it.
Yeah, it's all right. I'll have a look. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a good day and catch you tomorrow.
Then.
All right. Take care.